A small fantasy lives inside every person. One day, while walking in your garden or through a deserted forest, your foot suddenly strikes something hard. When you clear away the dirt, you realize it isn't a rock, it's a solid chunk of gold or silver. In that moment, you imagine you'll never have to work, pay bills, or worry about the future again. That's what we've been taught: money is the solution to every problem, wealth is something tangible you can possess. But history tells us the opposite. Finding a mountain full of money can be one of the most dangerous things that can happen to a person or to a nation. The real story of this is the 16th century Spanish Empire. The Spanish didn't just find a pot of gold, they found an entire mountain of silver. It was a fortune unlike anything seen in history. They believed it was a gift from God, that they would be masters of the world forever. But it turned out very differently. The story begins in 1492. Christopher Columbus's goal wasn't to discover a new continent, he was searching for a sea route to reach the spices and silk of Asia. 15th century Spain was not a wealthy country, it was a cold, dangerous land, worn down by wars. Precious metal was scarce, money was nearly non-existent, without gold or silver in hand, you could buy nothing. When Columbus returned from America, he brought back only a few gold trinkets. But that was enough to light a spark. Over the next 50 years, ruthless conquistadors like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro crossed the Atlantic in search of El Dorado, the legendary city of gold. They toppled the Aztec Empire in Mexico and the Inca Empire in Peru, melting down golden artifacts and shipping them back to Spain. This first wave of plunder enriched Spain, but it was a one-time windfall. You can only melt a statue once, after that, it's gone. Spain needed a lasting source of income, a mine. They found Cerro Rico, the rich mountain. According to legend, this mine was discovered in 1545. An indigenous man named Diego Gualpa, searching for a lost llama in the towering Andes of what is now Bolivia, grabbed a bush to keep from falling on a rocky slope. The bush tore out by its roots, revealing a gleaming vein of silver beneath it. This cone-shaped mountain, a volcanic freak of nature, turned out to be the richest silver deposit the world had ever found. The news spread fast. Within months, thousands of Spaniards flooded into this remote region and built a city at the foot of the mountain, Potosí. It quickly grew more populous than London or Paris, filled with gambling houses, churches, brothels, and violence, a Wild West, 3 centuries ahead of its time. Workers mixed the ore with mercury to extract the silver, a toxic but effective method, turned it into ingots and coins, and hauled it down from the Andes by mule train through Panama to the Atlantic, where great treasure fleets carried it to Seville twice a year. When the fleet arrived in port, the city rang with bells and its streets filled with crowds like an endless river of silver. Spain's king at the time, Philip II, was the most powerful man in the world. Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, much of Italy, the Americas, and the Philippines were all under his rule. The phrase, "the empire on which the sun never sets," was coined for him. Philip believed God had granted him this fortune so he could unite Europe under the Catholic faith. And he began spending. He built El Escorial, an enormous palace monastery near Madrid, but most of the money went to war. He fought the Ottomans at Lepanto, entered an 80-year war against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, clashed with France, and eventually equipped history's largest invasion fleet, the Spanish Armada, against England. All of it was paid for with Potosí's silver. From the outside, Spain looked unbeatable. But beneath the surface, something strange was happening. The population was growing poorer. Wages rose, yes, but the price of bread rose 4-fold, and the price of cloth 5-fold. For the previous 1,000 years, prices in Europe had stayed nearly flat. Suddenly a phenomenon called the price revolution appeared. The government couldn't understand it, blamed greedy merchants, and passed laws trying to fix prices. But the problem was simple: the amount of silver flowing into the country had doubled while actual needs, houses, bread, shoes, hadn't grown at all. Chase the same amount of goods with more money, and the result is inflation. The country essentially turned into a funnel. This inflation made Spanish goods the most expensive in the world. Spanish wool and steel were no longer competitive, while France, England, and the Netherlands lacking mountains of silver kept their prices low. So the Spanish did the logical thing, they bought the cheaper foreign goods instead. Silver never stayed in Spain, it entered the country and immediately flowed into foreign merchants' pockets. Spain had become a mouth that took in food and passed it along without digesting it. The digestion the industry was being done by the rest of Europe. Factories closed, looms stood idle, and manual labor became something to look down on. Who wants to work when there's silver in your pocket? The wealthy bought land and titles, turning into idle aristocrats. The poor sought refuge in cities, the church, or the army. The productive middle class that holds a nation together simply dissolved. Even more surprising, the king who owned an entire mountain of silver was perpetually in debt. Philip borrowed from German and Italian bankers, especially the Fugger and Welser families, before the silver even arrived, using the next year's treasure fleet as collateral. It was living paycheck to paycheck on a continental scale, betting that the ships wouldn't sink in a storm or fall to pirates. But sometimes the ships did sink. By 1557, the mountain of debt had outgrown the mountain of silver. Philip formally declared bankruptcy. Banks collapsed, unpaid soldiers mutinied. In 1576, unpaid Spanish troops sacked and burned the city of Antwerp in the Netherlands, an event that went down in history as the Spanish Fury, permanently uniting the Dutch against Spain. Philip went bankrupt again in 1575, and again in 1596, 3 times within a single reign. The richest king in the world couldn't pay his debts. This dependency also carried a political cost. Because the king had his own source of income, he had no need to ask the public for taxes, and thus no need to negotiate with a parliament, unlike in England. This pushed Spain toward an increasingly autocratic, centralized, and sluggish government rather than democratization. Behind this wealth lay a hidden cost. Potosí wasn't just a mine, it was a graveyard. Using the tmida, a forced labor system inherited from the Inca Empire, the Spanish took thousands of indigenous men from their villages each year and made them work in the mines for months without seeing sunlight. High altitude, thin air, the danger of collapse, silicosis causing dust, and the toxic mercury used to separate the silver, all of it killed millions of people over the centuries. It could be said that every silver coin spent in Europe was, in truth, stained with blood. By the 17th century, the decline had become irreversible. Those who governed Philip's successors were weak rulers who left administration to favor seeking ministers. Easy money dried up once again, or quality dropped, extraction costs rose, and the treasure fleets shrank. As Spain tried to squeeze more taxes out of its colonies, unrest grew in Mexico and Peru, the seeds of the independence movements that would tear the empire apart in the 19th century. In 1628 came one final humiliation. The Dutch Admiral Piet Hein captured an entire Spanish treasure fleet off the coast of Cuba, one of the greatest heists in naval history. When the news reached Madrid, the economy collapsed once more. The stolen silver was then used to fund the Dutch army fighting against Spain. A perfect irony, Potosí's silver ended up being spent to defeat Spain itself. The lesson for today. Potosí Mountain still rises over the Andes today, riddled with tunnels, a reddish cone emerging from obscurity. This story isn't ancient history, it's a warning. In fact, we see the same cycle today, when oil-rich countries see their currency strengthen and their other industries collapse as a result. It's called Dutch disease. Venezuela, home to the world's largest oil reserves, neglected its agriculture and industry and is now one of the poorest countries in the world. Nauru, a tiny phosphate-rich island, once had the highest per capita income in the world for a decade and is now bankrupt. An even bigger warning applies to the Western world. Spain minted coins. We print paper money and digital credit. Central banks can create trillions of dollars with a few keystrokes, as they did during the 2008 crisis and the 2020 pandemic. And just as in the 16th century, housing and food prices rise while manufacturing moves overseas because it's cheaper there. The question is, are we, too, confusing money with the real health of an economy? The fall of the Spanish Empire didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, painful process spanning a century, so slow that most people didn't notice until it was too late. In Madrid, They kept building palaces, still believing they were masters of the world. But the foundation had already rotted. The Silver Mountain, still magnificent from a distance, was as hollow as the empire that found it. The lesson is clear and mathematically precise. Wealth is not something you dig out of the ground, it's something you produce: a field, a loom, a shipyard, an educated people. Money is merely a tool that keeps score. If you have the highest score on the scoreboard but no players left on the field, you lose the game. You cannot forever consume more than you produce. Sooner or later, the bill comes due. We'd be grateful if you subscribed to our channel and supported us. See you in our next video.